September 14th, 1993. A routine Lufthansa flight is moments from landing in Warsaw. Visibility is perfect. The crew is experienced. The aircraft is modern and fully functional. Everything appears normal. Then the radio crackles. Severe wind shear on final. In the cockpit, two captains make a decision. One that follows the rule book but collides head-on with an invisible force racing across the airfield. This is the story of Lufthansa Flight 2904 and the 9 seconds that changed everything. September 14th, 1993. Frankfurt Airport bustles with its usual rhythm. In the early afternoon light, Lufthansa Flight 2904, an Airbus A320, sits parked at Gate A18, preparing for its final leg of the day, a routine flight to Warsaw, Poland. On board, 64 passengers settle into their seats. Some flip through magazines. Others stare quietly out the windows, unaware that they'll soon become part of one of Europe's most studied aviation accidents. Among them are business travelers, connecting tourists, and 2 infants in arms. It's the kind of ordinary flight where no one gives a second thought to safety procedures. In the forward galley, 4 flight attendants run through last-minute cabin checks. In the cockpit, 2 captains, both highly experienced, review weather reports and flight plans. The pilot flying today is undergoing a routine proficiency check following a 90-day absence from flight duty. Beside him, the instructor captain calmly monitors, ready to intervene if necessary. Between them, more than 24,000 hours of flight experience. The aircraft, an Airbus A320-200 registered DAIPN, is nearly brand new. Built just 3 years earlier, it's flown fewer than 7,500 hours. Every system has passed inspection. Every checklist is complete. The flight plan is loaded. Fuel is on board. Nothing seems out of place. Frankfurt's skies are calm. 23 degrees Celsius, a light southerly breeze, and excellent visibility. Weather reports for Warsaw appear routine. Scattered clouds, good visibility, winds from 150 degrees at 22 kilometers per hour. No storms. No significant weather alerts. At least, not yet. Pushback clearance is received. At 14:10 UTC, the engines spool to life. The aircraft taxis toward runway 18 for departure. Inside the cabin, passengers adjust seatbelts as flight attendants make final announcements. Outside, clouds begin to gather over central Poland, but Warsaw remains operational, and the flight is cleared for takeoff. Lufthansa 2904 is wheels up and climbing smoothly to 33,000 feet. The crew switches over to en route navigation and begins monitoring Warsaw's terminal area weather broadcasts. Nothing seems out of the ordinary, but hundreds of kilometers ahead, an atmospheric front is advancing rapidly toward Warsaw, building in force, dragging unstable air masses, rain and wind shear in its wake. For now, DLH 2904 cruises in clear air, seemingly insulated from what's coming. What the crew doesn't know is that by the time they begin their descent, the skies over Warsaw will have turned hostile. As DLH 2904 cruised at 33,000 feet toward Warsaw, something ominous was building ahead. A massive atmospheric front was racing eastward across Poland, bringing with it heavy rain, violent wind shifts, and a meteorological phenomenon that would soon turn this routine flight into a nightmare. At 15:08 UTC, the crew began listening to Warsaw's weather broadcasts. The information was routine. Wind from 150 degrees at 22 kilometers per hour. Visibility 10 kilometers. Scattered clouds. Nothing unusual. nothing to suggest the danger that lay just minutes ahead. As DLH-2904 began its descent toward Warsaw Okęcie Airport, the weather was deteriorating rapidly. The atmospheric front that meteorologists had tracked was now bearing down on the airport with unexpected intensity. At 15:28, air traffic control made an ominous transmission to another aircraft. Jet Aviation 101, the preceding traffic, has reported wind shear on final approach, runway 11. The crew of DLH-2904 heard this clearly. At 15:31, Warsaw Tower delivered their approach clearance with a crucial warning. Lufthansa 2904, continue ILS approach, call me outer marker, wind 160 degrees, 25 kilometers per hour, and before your landing, it was reported wind shear on the final runway 11. The captain flying acknowledged, "Roger, that's understood. I call you outer marker." Just 2 minutes later, another aircraft that had just landed transmitted a chilling message. Warsaw Tower, good evening. Jet Aviation 101 is vacating runway 11 on taxiway E0. For information, we had severe wind shear on final. The crew now had 3 separate wind shear warnings. According to their flight manual procedures, they increased their approach speed by 20 knots as a precaution. This decision, while following protocol, would prove to have catastrophic consequences. But something else was happening that the crew didn't fully comprehend. The wind wasn't just shifting, it was completely reversing direction. Their flight management system showed ground speed significantly higher than airspeed, indicating a strong tailwind component. The wind was now coming from behind them at nearly 25 knots, far exceeding the aircraft's 10-knot tailwind limitation. The crew had visual contact with the airport and could see the runway clearly. Everything appeared normal from their perspective. At 15:33:20, DLH-2904 passed the middle marker at 278 feet with an approach speed of 147 knots, well above the normal landing speed of 130 knots for their weight. The aircraft was approaching fast, high, and with a dangerous tailwind pushing them toward the runway. During the final approach, the flight data recorder captured a temporary decrease in airspeed lasting about 15 seconds, evidence of the wind shear that had been reported by previous aircraft. What happened next would expose a critical design flaw in the Airbus A320's safety systems. The aircraft crossed the runway threshold still flying 20 knots faster than normal. The increased approach speed, combined with the strong tailwind, meant they were covering ground much faster than usual. At 15:33:48, the right main landing gear made contact with the runway at 770 meters from the threshold, already using more than a quarter of the available runway length. But here's where technology betrayed them. The Airbus A320 was designed with multiple safety systems to prevent runway overruns. Ground spoilers would deploy to destroy lift. Thrust reversers would activate to slow the aircraft. Anti-skid brakes would engage to maximize stopping power. There was just one problem. These systems required the aircraft's computers to detect that the plane was actually on the ground. The A320's logic was simple, but fatal. For the systems to activate, both main landing gear shock struts had to compress simultaneously, indicating the full weight of the aircraft was on the runway. Alternatively, if wheel speed exceeded 72 knots on both main gears, the systems would activate. But DLH-2904 had landed with a significant right bank angle to counter the crosswind. Only the right main gear touched down initially. The left gear remained airborne. For 9 agonizing seconds, the aircraft rolled down the wet runway with only partial braking capability. The pilots applied manual wheel brakes immediately after the right gear touched down, but the brakes failed to work effectively. The captain flying called for assistance from the instructor captain. Without the spoilers deployed and thrust reversers activated, the stopping power was insufficient. The aircraft continued rolling down runway 11 at high speed. Heavy rain had been falling for several minutes, leaving the runway surface covered with an uneven layer of water several millimeters deep. The flight data recorder showed the aircraft maintaining a ground speed of over 160 knots during this critical period. What the crew didn't realize was that they were now trapped in a technological catch-22. Their training had taught them to rely on the aircraft's automated systems for maximum braking effectiveness. But those same systems required specific conditions to activate. The Airbus A320's designers had built in these safeguards to prevent accidental deployment during flight, never anticipating a scenario where an aircraft would land on only one main gear for an extended period. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking. Every second that passed meant another 80 meters of runway consumed at their current speed. The wet surface made manual braking nearly ineffective, and without spoilers to kill the remaining lift, the aircraft wasn't settling its full weight onto the wheels. At 15:33:57, 9 seconds after the right gear touchdown, the left main landing gear finally contacted the runway at 1,525 meters from the threshold. The moment both shock struts compressed, the automated systems sprang to life. Spoilers deployed to their full 50-degree angle. Thrust reversers opened, and engines spooled up to 71% power. Full braking capability was finally available. But it was too late. The aircraft had already consumed more than half the available runway length. With only 1,275 meters remaining, the stopping distance would be marginal even under ideal conditions. These weren't ideal conditions. The aircraft's tires, already worn on 3 of the 4 main gear wheels, began to aquaplane. The crew realized they wouldn't stop in time. They applied full right rudder, attempting to steer the aircraft away from the obstacle ahead. The plane began to turn right, but its momentum carried it straight forward. The laws of physics were now in control. At 15:34:19, DLH-2904 rolled off the end of runway 11 at 72 knots ground speed. Ahead lay a 90-meter stretch of grass, then a concrete embankment with a navigation antenna mounted on top. The aircraft crossed this distance in seconds. The impact tore open fuel tanks and severed electrical systems. Immediately, aviation fuel began spilling from ruptured tanks on the left side of the aircraft. Within moments, fire erupted, most likely ignited by contact with the hot, damaged engine or electrical systems from the destroyed antenna. Thick black smoke began filling the passenger cabin. What made this even more tragic was that the crew had multiple opportunities to recognize the danger they were in. Their electronic flight information system clearly showed the discrepancy between airspeed and ground speed, indicating the severe tailwind. The weather radar could have revealed the intensity of the approaching storm front, but the crew had switched it off after gaining visual contact with the airport. They had received not 1, not 2, but 3 separate wind shear warnings from air traffic control and other aircraft. Perhaps most critically, they could have initiated a go-around procedure even after the first touchdown. Aviation procedures allow for go-around decisions right up until both main landing gears are firmly on the ground. But the crew believed their touchdown was normal and continued with the landing sequence, unaware that their most critical safety systems were still locked out by the aircraft's computer logic. The report highlighted that in emergency situations, pilots could not manually override the logic that prevented early deployment of ground spoilers and thrust reversers. This safety feature had actually prevented the crew from accessing their most effective stopping systems when they needed them most. The Warsaw incident exposed critical gaps in aviation safety. Airlines worldwide improved their wind shear procedures, emphasizing go-around decisions when multiple risk factors combine. Aircraft manufacturers developed enhanced training programs, but Warsaw serves as a permanent reminder that in aviation, safety isn't just about having the most advanced technology. It's about understanding how that technology works, when it works, and crucially, when it doesn't. The skies are safer today because 70 people experienced the unthinkable on a rainy September afternoon in Warsaw, and investigators refuse to let their stories be forgotten.